The morning air was cool and still when Jack Morrison stepped out onto his small wooden porch. His cabin sat at the edge of Clearwater Lake, a quiet piece of water surrounded by tall pine trees and hills that caught the morning light just right. He stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath of clean air and watching the thin layer of mist roll across the lake's surface. To him, this was peace, the kind of peace he had dreamed about for years. After living half his life in the noise of the city, with traffic, crowds, and endless work hours, this small cabin felt like freedom. It wasn't fancy. It had one bedroom, a creaky floor, and a porch that leaned slightly to one side, but Jack didn't care. What mattered most to him was the view of the water and the small wooden dock where his old fishing boat rested. The boat wasn't much to look at. The paint was faded, and a few boards showed their age, but it was sturdy. He had bought it second-hand from a man who told him it had plenty of life left. Jack had spent a few weekends fixing it up himself, sanding the sides, tightening the bolts, and repainting the name across the bow. Lazy days. It wasn't a fancy speedboat like the others around the lake, but it was his pride and joy every morning. Jack took his boat out, sometimes to fish, sometimes just to drift. He liked the way the water sounded against the hull, and how the world felt calm out there, far from the shore. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere, but not everyone around the lake saw it that way. Most of the other homes that surrounded Clearwater Lake were big, modern houses with glass walls, expensive decks, and shiny boats that looked like they had never been used. The people who lived there came from the nearby city. They spent weekends at their vacation homes hosting barbecues and showing off their wealth. When Jack first moved in, they barely noticed him. A few waved politely when he passed by in his pickup truck, but most didn't say a word. He didn't mind. He wasn't looking for attention. All he wanted was a quiet life and a place to fish. That peace didn't last long. One afternoon, while Jack was sitting on his dock fixing a fishing line, a man from one of the large houses walked over. He wore sunglasses, a clean white shirt, and loafers that looked out of place near the water. He smiled politely, but his tone was sharp. "Hey there," the man said. "Nice day, huh? Listen, a few of us have been talking about that old boat of yours." Jack looked up, unsure what he meant. "Yeah, what about it?" "Well," the man said, shifting awkwardly, "it kind of stands out. You know, most of the homes here have a certain look. We try to keep things neat, uniform. Maybe you could park it somewhere else. It just doesn't really fit the style of the neighborhood." Jack stared at him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "This is my dock," he said. "And that's my boat. I think it fits just fine." The man's polite smile faded a little. "Right, sure. Just thought I'd mention it." He turned and walked off without another word. Jack shrugged it off. He didn't want trouble, but a few days later he noticed a letter taped to his mailbox. It was from the Clearwater Homeowners Association. The letter said his boat was a visual disturbance to the aesthetic harmony of the lake, and that it should be relocated to a less visible area. Jack read the letter twice and laughed to himself. "A visual disturbance?" he muttered. "It's a boat on a lake." He tossed the letter on the counter and didn't think much more of it. But that wasn't the end. The next week he saw two women standing on the opposite shore, pointing toward his dock. They talked for a while, shaking their heads. Later that evening, another letter appeared. This one sounded more serious. It mentioned possible penalties for non-compliance. Jack wasn't the kind of man to pick fights, but he also wasn't the kind to back down from what was right. The boat was on his property, tied to his dock, sitting in the same water everyone else used. He wasn't breaking any rules. He decided to ignore the letters. Over the next few days, the tension grew. When he went out fishing, a few of the neighbors didn't wave anymore. Some gave him long stares from their fancy decks, whispering to each other. Jack could feel the weight of their disapproval every time he passed by. One afternoon, as he was coming back from a quiet fishing trip, he noticed a few people standing near his driveway. They looked like they were waiting for him. As he got closer, one of them, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled hair and a clipboard, stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "we've sent multiple notices about your boat. It's against community guidelines. We're asking you one last time to move it or remove it." Jack tilted his head. "Community guidelines? I don't remember signing up for any community rules." "Well," she said, looking annoyed, This area is managed by the Clearwater Homeowners Association. Everyone here follows the same standards. I don't recall joining your association, Jack replied calmly. And as far as I know, this land and dock belong to me. So unless you've got a law that says otherwise, that boat isn't going anywhere. The woman frowned. If you continue to refuse, we'll have to take legal action. Jack gave a small smile. You do what you think is right. I'll do the same. They left after that, but not before exchanging a few frustrated glances. That night, Jack sat on his porch, sipping a cup of coffee and looking out at the water. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the lake gold and orange. His boat bobbed gently in the light, and for a moment he felt a sense of quiet pride. He wasn't trying to make enemies. He just wanted to live peacefully and enjoy the lake he loved. But something in his gut told him this was just the beginning. The way those people had talked, the way they acted like they owned everything, it didn't sit right with him. He didn't know it yet, but soon the same people who told him to move his boat would regret ever starting that conversation, because Jack wasn't just a man with an old boat. He was a man who didn't like being pushed around, and he was about to show them exactly what that meant. The next few weeks were quiet, but not in a good way. Jack could feel the change in the air. The neighbors who once gave small nods now turned their heads the other way. Conversations stopped when he walked by. Even the mailman seemed nervous, handing him envelopes that now came almost every week from the same sender, the Clearwater Homeowners Association. At first, Jack stacked the letters on his counter without opening them. He had made his point. His boat was staying right where it was. But one morning, curiosity got the better of him. He opened one and read it slowly, his brow tightening with every line. It wasn't just a complaint this time. It was a warning. The letter claimed that if he didn't move the boat, the association would take necessary steps to ensure compliance. Jack didn't like the tone of that. It sounded more like a threat than a request. He sighed, folded the letter, and set it down. He wasn't sure what necessary steps meant, but he wasn't going to let a group of rich weekend homeowners scare him. The boat wasn't hurting anyone. It wasn't polluting the water. It wasn't blocking their view. It was just there. A few days later, while Jack was raking leaves by his driveway, a silver SUV pulled up. Out stepped a man in a suit holding a clipboard and wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. "Mr. Morrison?" the man asked. "That's me," Jack replied, leaning on his rake. "I'm with the Clearwater Homeowners Association. We've received multiple complaints about your vessel. I'm here to give you formal notice of violation." Jack blinked. "Violation? Of what law?" "Of Community Code 4.3. Visual consistency and property aesthetics," the man said without emotion. Jack chuckled softly. "So my boat doesn't match your view, and that's a violation now?" "Sir," the man said, clearly annoyed, "you agreed to these terms when you purchased your property." Jack shook his head. "I bought this place from an old fisherman. There were no association papers, no signatures, just a deed and a handshake." The man frowned, flipping through his clipboard. "Well, it appears the area is under association management. If you refuse to comply, there could be fines and—" Jack interrupted. "Look, friend, this is my dock and my land. If your people don't like how it looks, that's their problem. The boat's not going anywhere." The man sighed, scribbled something on his clipboard, and walked back to his SUV. "You'll be hearing from us soon," he said before driving off. Jack stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear up the dirt road. He felt a slow heat rising in his chest. Not anger exactly, but a sense of injustice. How could people who didn't even live there full time tell him what he could or couldn't do on his own land? That night, as he sat on his porch listening to crickets and the soft splash of water against the dock, he thought about what had just happened. He wasn't a man who liked conflict. He'd spent his whole life avoiding drama. But this wasn't about a boat anymore. This was about being pushed around. A few days later, a new letter arrived, this one with a bold red stamp that said "Final Notice." Jack opened it slowly. It said that the HOA was filing a formal complaint with the county, claiming his boat violated community visual standards and requesting local action. He couldn't believe it. They were actually taking it that far. He walked down to the lake and stood by the boat. The sun was low, turning the water a deep orange. He ran his hand along the wooden side, feeling the cool surface beneath his fingers. He remembered all the hours he'd spent sanding it down, painting it, fixing the motor. That boat wasn't just an object, it was... "No one's moving you," he said softly. "Not without a fight." That weekend, Jack noticed something strange. A few of the homeowners were having a get-together, grilling, laughing, music playing. But every now and then, one of them would look toward his cabin, whisper something, then shake their head. It didn't bother him much. But what did bother him was when he found a small sign stuck into the edge of his property the next morning. It read, "Private Community, Authorized Access Only." He stared at it for a long moment, then pulled it out of the ground and tossed it aside. That same afternoon, he decided to drive into town and speak with the county office himself. If the association was going to throw around legal words, he wanted to know the truth. Inside the county records office, a young woman greeted him at the desk. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes, ma'am," Jack said. "I live by Clearwater Lake. Folks from the Homeowners Association are saying they manage the area, but I'd like to see the property records." She nodded and went to pull up the files. After a few minutes of searching, she frowned slightly. "That's odd," she said. "It looks like the Homeowners Association doesn't actually own the lake or the access road. The land around it is divided between private owners, including you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "So they don't have authority over my property?" She shook her head. "Not from what I can see. You'd have to check with the assessor's office to be sure. But it looks like the lake itself is owned by a private company that's been inactive for years." Jack thanked her and left the building deep in thought. A private company? Inactive? That meant there might be a way to buy it, or at least figure out who really had control over it. On the drive back, his mind began to turn. For the first time, he wasn't angry. He was curious. Maybe the situation wasn't as one-sided as they made it seem. Maybe the people who thought they owned everything around that lake were about to get a surprise. That evening, he sat at his old wooden table with a cup of coffee, staring at the papers spread out before him. The letters from the HOA, his deed, and the notes he'd taken from the records office. He started to sketch out an idea. He didn't know all the details yet. But one thing was clear. If they wanted a fight, they were picking it with the wrong man. The boat rocked gently outside, its reflection shimmering under the moonlight. To anyone else, it was just an old piece of wood floating on the lake, but to Jack it had become something more like a line in the sand. And soon, the people who told him to move it would realize they had underestimated the quiet man at the edge of Clearwater Lake. The next morning, Jack woke up with a new kind of energy. The anger he'd been feeling for weeks had turned into focus. He wasn't going to waste any more time arguing with people who didn't respect him. He wanted answers. He brewed himself a pot of coffee, grabbed a notebook, and sat down at the kitchen table. He opened his laptop and started looking for information about Clearwater Lake, who owned it, who managed it, and what rights came with owning property by the water. It didn't take long to find something interesting. The lake wasn't listed under the Homeowners Association's name. Instead, it was still registered under a small land management company that had been inactive for several years. The company's address was listed in another county, and there was a note in the record saying it was available for private purchase pending review. Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "So they don't own it," he said quietly. "Not even close." He decided to make a few phone calls. It took most of the day, but he finally reached someone from the county land office who confirmed what he suspected. The lake and the narrow dirt road that led into the neighborhood were both part of an old property bundle that had been left unsold when the developers went bankrupt years ago. Technically, the man on the phone said, whoever buys that land would own the lake rights and the access road. It's just sitting there. Not many people even know it's available. Jack sat there for a moment, letting that sink in. The same people who'd been sending him letters and threatening fines didn't even have the right to do it. They didn't own the water they were trying to control. He thanked the man for his time and hung up. Then he smiled to himself, a slow, quiet smile that hadn't appeared in weeks. That night he could hardly sleep. His mind was racing with possibilities. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about fairness, about standing up for himself in a way that couldn't be ignored. The next morning he drove back to the county office in person. He wanted to see the documents with his own eyes. The clerk behind the counter recognized him from before and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were maps, old sale records, and a detailed description of the property line. "The entire lake and road are part of this package," she said, pointing to the papers. "It's not cheap, but considering the location, it's a fair price. Nobody's touched it in years." Jack studied the papers for a while. He had savings. He'd worked most of his life as a contractor, building homes for other people. He had enough tucked away for retirement, but not much else to spend it on. He'd planned to live quietly. Now, maybe that quiet life needed a little adjustment. "How do I make an offer?" he asked. The clerk explained the process, a few forms, an application, and some verification steps. By the end of the day, Jack had filled out everything. He drove home feeling lighter than he had in months. Over the next 2 weeks, while the paperwork went through, the HOA continued to send letters. They warned him about pending actions, community violations, and potential fines. Jack didn't reply. He didn't even open most of them. He just smiled whenever he saw another envelope in the mailbox. One afternoon, a few of the neighbors gathered near his driveway again. He saw them from his porch. The same people who had complained before. They were talking quietly, looking in his direction. He could tell they were upset that he hadn't backed down. When one of them finally called out, "Are you ever going to move that thing?" Jack just gave a small wave and said, "Not planning to." They shook their heads and walked away, muttering under their breath. 3 weeks later, the call came. The sale had gone through. The lake, the road, and all associated rights now belonged to Jack Morrison. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, the phone still in his hand, staring out the window at the water. His heart was pounding, not from anger, but from disbelief. The same people who had tried to push him out had just lost control over the one thing they thought they ruled, the lake itself. He walked down to the dock, looking out over the calm surface. It was his now, officially. Every ripple, every reflection, every morning mist belonged to him. He ran his hand along the old wooden rail and let out a quiet laugh. The next few days, he kept the news to himself. He wanted to make sure all the documents were finalized. He spoke with the county clerk one last time, confirmed the title transfer, and had the deeds delivered to his home. They were real, signed, and legal. He had done it. A week later, the Homeowners Association sent another letter, demanding once again that he remove his boat. This time, Jack decided to respond. He took one of the envelopes, wrote a short note on a single sheet of paper, and sent it back. It said only 4 words. "You're on my lake." A few days later, the phone calls started. The HOA president wanted to talk. The neighbors wanted a meeting. They were confused, panicked even, once they realized what he meant. Jack agreed to meet them, not out of spite, but because he wanted to set things straight. The meeting was held in the small community hall near the edge of the neighborhood. When Jack walked in, every eye turned to him. Some looked angry, others nervous. The HOA president started to speak, his voice shaky but firm. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "we've heard some claims about property ownership that can't possibly be true." Jack calmly placed a stack of papers on the table, copies of the deed, the sale documents, and the maps. "They're true," he said. "I own the lake, and the road you used to get here." There was silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He just looked around the room, meeting each face one by one. "All I ever wanted was to be left alone," he said quietly. "You told me my boat didn't belong here. Now, as far as the law goes, it belongs here more than anything else." He gathered his papers, nodded politely, and walked out. That night, back at his cabin, he sat on his porch again. The air was cool, the moon bright over the lake. He could hear the faint hum of crickets and the gentle creak of his boat tied to the dock. He smiled to himself. Not out of pride, but relief. The battle was over, and he hadn't just won it. He'd rewritten the rules entirely. And somewhere, deep down, he knew that from this point on, Clearwater Lake would never be quite the same again. The morning after the meeting, Jack woke up to a calm lake and bright sunlight streaming through the cabin window. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. The papers were signed. The lake and access road were officially his. But he also knew that winning on paper didn't mean the neighbors would accept it easily. Over the next few days, he noticed subtle changes in their behavior. The homeowners who had complained so loudly before were quieter now. They walked past his property without looking directly at him, whispered behind their hands, or sometimes just drove away when he stepped outside. It was obvious that they were trying to figure out how to deal with. Jack didn't want to fight. He wanted respect and fairness, but he also realized that some lessons had to be learned in a way people couldn't ignore. He decided to take control in a quiet, confident way. He started with small changes. He repaired the old access road that led to the lake. It was full of potholes and worn patches, but with some gravel, a few hours of shoveling, and his own effort, it became smooth and solid. He didn't announce it. He just did it. Now anyone coming to the neighborhood had to drive over a road that Jack owned and maintained. Next, he turned his attention to the lake itself. The water was clean, clear, and perfect for fishing or boating, but some sections near the shoreline were overgrown with weeds. Jack spent the mornings clearing them, trimming trees and making small paths along the edge. The boat was polished, tied neatly to the dock, ready for the water. People started to notice. One by one, neighbors came to the edge of their yards and stopped, whispering to each other. Some of them walked closer, clearly trying to figure out what he was doing. Jack simply waved politely but didn't explain anything. Then came the first real test. One of the homeowners, the loudest of the group who had first complained about the boat, walked up to the edge of Jack's property and said, "You can't just own this. You can't tell us what to do." Jack looked at him calmly, smiling slightly. "I already do. You're on my property now. You can use the road, but everything else belongs to me. The lake, the dock, the water, all of it." The man's face went red. He stammered, trying to argue, but Jack didn't raise his voice. "I'm not here to fight," he said gently. "I just want to be left alone, and I want to make sure this place stays clean and safe for everyone who visits. If you follow the rules, we can all get along." For a moment, the man looked like he was going to yell. Then he turned and walked away. He muttered under his breath, but Jack didn't react. He had expected this. Over the next few days, Jack started marking the boundaries of his property more clearly. Small, unobtrusive signs showed where the private area began. He also started letting people use the road, but only under the condition that they respected the lake and kept it clean. Anyone who ignored the rules would have to turn back. The homeowners realized quickly that Jack wasn't bluffing. He was calm but firm, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Slowly, their attitude began to shift. The complaints stopped. The letters disappeared. Instead, some of the neighbors started asking him questions: how he had fixed the road, how he cleaned the lake, even how he maintained his boat. Jack answered politely, never gloating, never boasting. He shared tips on keeping the shoreline clear, keeping the water clean, and even fishing techniques. The same people who had tried to push him out weeks ago were now listening carefully. Some even laughed at themselves for being so stubborn. It wasn't long before the neighborhood began to change. The HOA, realizing that their authority no longer existed on the lake or the road, eventually stopped sending letters altogether. The president of the association called Jack once, not to argue, but to clarify some legal points about the road. Jack explained everything politely and clearly. After that, there were no more calls. Jack felt a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about winning a battle. It was about fairness and standing up for what was right. He had done it without fighting or creating hostility, but by simply claiming what was his and showing people the truth. One afternoon, while sitting on the dock with a fishing pole in hand, a few neighbors approached him carefully. They didn't come to argue this time. They came with cups of lemonade, offering thanks for fixing the road and making the lake accessible again. Some of them even apologized for how they had treated him at first. Jack smiled and accepted the drinks. "We're all learning," he said. "I get it. It's hard to change your mind sometimes. But now we can all enjoy this place together." The neighbors nodded, and for the first time there was no tension. They walked back to their homes, laughing softly, and Jack returned to his fishing. He felt lighter than he had in months. That evening, as the sun set over the lake, painting the water orange and pink, Jack sat quietly on the dock. The boat rocked gently against the wood, and he realized something important. It wasn't just about the property or the road. It was about respect, fairness, and the courage to stand up for yourself. The people who had tried to push him around had underestimated him, not because he was aggressive, but because he had patience, clarity, and determination. He had shown them that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it moves quietly, steadily, and inevitably. Over the following weeks, Jack continued improving the property. He planted flowers near the dock, added benches for anyone visiting the lake, and even built a small fire pit where families could gather safely. The atmosphere changed completely. People came to enjoy the water, to fish, or just to watch the sunset. And slowly the lake became a symbol not of conflict but of cooperation. Everyone who visited knew who owned the property and respected it. Jack didn't need to fight anymore. He had won the trust and quiet admiration of the community without raising his voice or breaking a single rule. One evening, as he sat on the dock sipping coffee, a gentle breeze rippling across the water, Jack realized he had found something more valuable than ownership. He had found peace, respect, and a place where he could finally feel at home. The lake glimmered in the fading light, and the boat floated quietly, tied firmly to the dock. Jack smiled to himself, knowing that everything he had done, every letter ignored, every legal step taken, every calm explanation, had led to this moment. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt completely free. The weeks after the lake officially became his were filled with a quiet satisfaction for Jack. Every morning he woke up to the soft light of dawn reflecting on the water, and he felt a sense of calm that had been missing for years. The conflict with the neighbors had faded into an uneasy peace, which gradually turned into something closer to understanding. One morning, Jack noticed a family walking along the edge of the property. They paused to admire the lake, pointing to the water and talking quietly to each other. He waved, and the father came over to introduce himself. "Thank you for letting us enjoy this," the man said. "It's beautiful here. We used to drive by and always wondered what it would be like to spend time on the lake." Jack smiled. "You're welcome. Just be sure to leave everything as you found it. Respect the water and it will respect you back." The family nodded, and as they walked back, Jack realized how different the atmosphere was compared to a few months ago. The lake had gone from being a source of tension to a place where people could come together without conflict. It was still his property, yes, but it also belonged to anyone who respected it. Jack began to think more about the future. He wanted the lake to stay beautiful, so he started making small improvements. He built a simple bench near the water, cleared the paths around the shoreline, and even planted a few trees to provide shade. It was quiet work, and he liked that. He had spent so much energy fighting before that the peace felt almost luxurious. One afternoon, he decided to invite a few neighbors to a small gathering by the lake. Not everyone came, but several showed up, curious about what he had done. Jack didn't make it formal. He simply set up chairs, put a few snacks on a table, and let people settle naturally. The conversation started slowly. At first, some of the neighbors were hesitant, unsure if they should speak or even sit close. But Jack's calm and friendly manner encouraged them. They talked about fishing, gardening, and other simple things. Slowly, laughter began to fill the air, replacing the tension that had once defined the neighborhood. One of the older neighbors, the same man who had complained most about the boat at the beginning, approached Jack. He had a quiet, almost shy expression. "You know," he said, "I was wrong about you. I didn't understand what you were doing. I thought you were just trying to make trouble." Jack shook his head gently. "I wasn't trying to make trouble. I just wanted a place where I could live my life without being told I didn't belong. That's all." The man nodded slowly, a small smile forming. "I get it now, and thank you for being patient. I think I understand a little better what it means to respect someone's space." Jack smiled back. It was a rare moment of genuine connection. He realized that this was more valuable than any legal victory or deed. Changing someone's mind, earning respect, and creating a sense of community felt like a true success. Over the next few months, the lake became a hub of quiet, friendly activity. People would come to fish, to watch the sunset, or just sit by the water with a cup of coffee. The dock became a meeting place, not for arguments, but for shared enjoyment. Jack even taught a few children how to fish, showing them how to bait hooks and cast lines carefully. Jack's life had transformed. He no longer worried about letters, fines, or confrontation. Instead, he spent his days working on small projects around the lake, maintaining the property and enjoying the simplicity of life by the water. The peace he had fought for was real, and it wasn't fragile. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack sat on the dock with his feet dangling over the water. He could hear laughter from a small group nearby, children chasing each other along the shore. The lake reflected the colors of the sunset, and the gentle waves lapped at the edge. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The letters, the complaints, the feeling of being unwelcome. All of it had been a test. And now, he realized, he had learned something important. Strength didn't come from fighting aggressively or proving people wrong. True strength came from patience, clarity, and knowing your own worth. A gentle breeze brushed his face, carrying the scent of pine and water. Jack smiled. He had earned this place not through conflict but through determination and calm action. The lake belonged to him, yes, but it also belonged to anyone who respected it and the rules he had set. It was a balance he was proud to maintain. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Jack thought about the neighbors again. He no longer felt any tension or fear of conflict. Even the ones who had opposed him at first now treated him with a quiet respect. Some had even become friends. He leaned back on the dock, closing his eyes for a moment. The water shimmered under the moonlight, the air was cool, and everything felt right. The boat floated gently beside him, ready for morning fishing or an afternoon row. Jack realized that this lake had given him more than property or victory. It had given him clarity, peace, and a sense of accomplishment he had never felt before. He had turned a situation that could have been bitter and stressful into something positive, not just for himself but for the community around him. In the weeks that followed, Jack continued to improve the lake area. He built a small fire pit for gatherings, placed benches under the trees, and even added a small garden near the cabin. People would come and sit quietly, enjoying the calm, the water, and the beauty of the surroundings. Jack sometimes thought back to the day he had received the first letter telling him to move his boat. At that time, he had felt frustration and anger. But looking around now, he realized that everything had led to this. A life by the lake filled with peace, connection, and respect. He had bought more than just land. He had bought a sense of freedom, a place where he could be himself, and a community slowly learning to respect one another. That, he knew, was far more valuable than any victory on paper. As night fell and the stars reflected in the water, Jack sat quietly, letting the cool air and gentle sounds of the lake wash over him. He felt content, knowing he had done the right thing in the right way. No shouting, no anger, just patience, clarity, and steady determination. And in that quiet moment, he knew that this lake, his lake, would remain a place of peace, respect, and beauty for years to come. He had won not just a property, but a life. Part 5 wraps up the story, showing Jack's personal growth, the transformation of the community, and the peaceful resolution, keeping the tone human, calm, and inspirational. If you want, I can also create a single compiled version of all 5 parts ready for YouTube narration, so you don't have to stitch them together yourself. This would make it easier to use as a complete story script. Do you want me to do that?